Hello guys, thank you for another AMA, and today we're hosting an AMA with Dispatch Labs, a a new project and which we find very interesting, right? So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves to the team. So here we have the team from Dispatch Labs. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Zane Witherspoon. I'm the CTO at Dispatch Labs, and I don't think we're fully representative of the team, but we've got a couple of the founders here. My background's in cybersecurity. I used to work at Raytheon, found my way into blockchain around 2016. Started running the San Francisco Ethereum meetup early 2017, and founded Dispatch Labs with Matt and Patrick shortly after that.
Cool. I'm Matt McGraw. I'm the CEO of Dispatch Labs. I have lived in the Bay Area for about 25 years, so prior to the internet being a thing, which makes me the old man. And I backed into technology back in the mid-90s when it was starting to become a thing, and went through a couple early jobs in technology, really found out that I was unemployable and needed to be running my own things, and I founded a company called Rocket Science Consulting that became quite successful over the years. Sold that for lots of different reasons in 2014 and retired. I'm not one of those guys that you hear about that retires and has a hard time staying retired. I was pretty good at it and I liked it. But I invested in a company called SparkX that was run by a guy named Patrick Winstrom. Very shortly after I invested, he came to me and said, we want to use this thing called blockchain in our supply chain management module. I said, being on the beach with the dogs and having a new baby, I'm not really sure about this blockchain thing yet. Let me look into it. I took a weekend. By the end of the weekend, probably like everybody watching, I had my come to Jesus moment and was sold on blockchain as a technology, was sold on it being kind of the future of the internet or a replacement for the current internet, really. And immediately turned my attention to getting into the community here in the Bay Area, which at the time, of course, I didn't know the Bay Area wasn't the center of the universe for blockchain. It's the center of the universe for a lot of technology, but blockchain is obviously way more global than just San Francisco. So to do that, to kind of do my market analysis on the community, I looked for developers, and I went to the San Francisco Ethereum developers meetup run by this guy, and we hit it off, and we had a mutual man crush on each other, I think. Not sure if that survived till today, but Patrick and Zane and I kicked around many different ideas about what we wanted to do in the space thereafter. We figured on, we kind of settled on a digital peer-to-peer marketplace idea. Very quickly came to realize that we literally couldn't build what we wanted on any of the current existing chains. This is in early 2017. And so we set out to build what we needed for our needs. And for all of my background with rocket science was helping quickly scaling startups scale. So Twitter, Facebook, Foursquare, Joyent, Heroku, all of these giant companies that came out of the Bay Area in 2008 to 2012, they were all my clients. And I think whenever I think about building a platform or leading a company that's building a platform, helping this guy and his team build a platform really, I think about those people and those companies and those projects and how they built and what they needed. And what they needed was more than just scalability. I think that word gets used a lot and nobody really understands it. They need professionalism in code. They need integrated QA. They need a lot of different things, a lot of professionalism, a lot of maturity in the process on how to build that. And so I said, okay, I can do that. That's a value that I can help bring to the table. So he's got like the deep blockchain knowledge and the community knowledge. I've got the kind of how you do this over a longer period of time than just the 3-month typical crypto project scale. And then Patrick Winstrom, our COO, comes from PwC. So he was a partner at PwC. And he's got this enterprise vision and scale and deep experience in that. So I think we're very complementary and we just happen to like each other a lot too. So.
I think that's a really long-winded way of saying, hi, I'm Matt McGraw, I'm CEO.
Yeah. Can you tell I'm the sales guy here?
Cool. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, you're right. It seems that you have a very complementary teams that complement each other's skill sets and experience. I think that's a positive indicator in any team in the space, right? So let's move on to the first question, right? So can you tell us about Dispatch Labs and what makes it unique?
Cool. So Dispatch Labs is a blockchain company that's developing the dispatch protocol. which is an infrastructure for decentralized applications. First and foremost, we're a platform to build applications that have no servers, and we're building on the functionality of platforms like Ethereum by including not just smart contracts and distributed compute, distributed networking, but also distributed storage. And as Matt alluded to, that full lifecycle management of data.
Okay, thanks for that. So when you say that you focus on business applications, right, according to the white paper and the website, do you think that businesses nowadays in this current system is ready to jump on the on using blockchain as a technology for their processes?
I can take that one. The short answer is no. The longer answer is you got to start somewhere, and sales life cycles are more than 90 days. And so the technology is in its infancy. I don't think it's, recently we had this conversation, I don't think this industry is in like the early 90s or late 90s, which I hear a lot when we're out there talking. I think it's in the 70s. I got this idea from someone in Hong Kong. It really is at the very earliest stages of this technology. Nobody knows who's going to be successful at this stage of the game. And what I see a lot of is trial and error, and I think that's valid. I think that's actually pretty good. What I don't see a lot of is market analysis, market fit analysis, persona building of potential clients and customers. I don't see any real business nuance being kind of surrounding the technology bits. And that's something that we're doing. We have a complementary kind of sister company called The Bureau, which is an advisory in the space and an incubator, et cetera. And what we've done there is we've got 10 or 15 kind of use case clients that have come to us and are working with us to help co-create this protocol. They're telling us what they actually need. And we're building that. We're not just building that for them, but we're taking their advice, putting it all together and making some decisions surrounding what we think is better market analysis. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that. All right, so let's yes, and I agree with you. As in, a lot of projects do fail to have a go-to-market strategy and doing market analysis, right? Because that is extremely important when you want to create a solution for your target market. And you pointed out that that is one of the principles or features apparent in Dispatch Lab. Thanks for that, right? So let's move on into the technology side, right? I'm sure many are interested to know about the transactions on Dispatch Lab that do not require fees and you guys have extremely fast waiting times. So can you tell us the rationale behind using DAPOS and how it stacks up against proof of work or proof of stake?
Yes, I love talking about tech, especially consensus algorithms are my jam.
Yeah.
Because I think they're really cool because it's actually how you decide on truth. It's like an algorithm for truth, which is really, really cool to me. So one of the things that people don't know much about consensus algorithms is that they've been around for way longer than blockchain. Proof of work, Nakamoto consensus, was the first consensus algorithm used in a blockchain. But we've since seen that there's so many more consensus algorithms like proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, proof of authority, et cetera, et cetera. So when we were doing our research on what's the best consensus algorithm to use in our protocol, it made sense not just to go back to 2008, but to go back and look at all the research that have been done. One of the problems and why I think we haven't seen a lot of those older consensus algorithms implemented in new blockchains is that a lot of the times you need to know how many nodes there are in order to reach consensus, which in an open system like blockchain, anybody can hop in and out, and you don't really have that constant variable. But by introducing the idea of like delegated proof of stake, all of a sudden we know for sure that there are 21 nodes. And all of a sudden you can use all these older, really well thought out consensus algorithms. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much what we did. We took what we got from delegated proof of stake, so stake-based voting to elect a certain number of nodes that handle the transactions. And then we were able to apply something that's really similar to the Paxos consensus algorithm developed in the late 70s, I want to say. So we end up with a gossip chain instead of a blockchain. And we apply a system of rate limiting based on your stake instead of transaction fees. So if you have one token that's worth like one transaction per day, approximately, it's something like that. So that way people don't necessarily need to keep burning tokens and refueling, especially if they're a startup that doesn't know how big they're going to scale, how fast.
Right. And I think one of the benefits of this approach is it's not ahistorical. Like one thing in the blockchain industry today, everybody thinks it's brand new, and everybody thinks that all of their ideas are brand new, and none of their ideas are brand new. And really paying homage to some well thought out, as you said, older consensus algorithms and merging them with this kind of new idea of decentralization, I think is really, really awesome. And it provides all sorts of cool business model tweaks that I think that's what drew me to the space more than the technology. I'm a technology guy, but I really think that the kind of tokenization layer provides a whole different avenue for governance and business models that are fundamentally better for the world, I think, and better for sustainability. And I don't mean that in an environmental sense, I mean that in an economic sense.
As far as I know, Dispatch Protocol is the very first to implement DPoS plus DAG kind of consensus algorithm like we've got.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, so let me turn the heat up a bit, right? Okay, so under the DAPOS structure, right, that's what you call farmers. Farmers are those that store artifacts, right, or off-chain data, right? And they have to be compensated for the bandwidth and storage, right? And the white paper states that on the launch of the network, Dispatch Labs will be offering free farming to help seed the DAN, right? So does this mean that when you talk about feeless transactions, it's only going to be at the initial stage?
No, I see. So I'd like to actually take a step back in your question and clarify the architecture a little bit, because what we have built out in the Dispatch protocol is really two networks that run parallel to each other. We've got the DAPOS chain that we just talked about, and then we've got the distributed network of farmers that are holding on to all that data. What connects the two is the Dispatch virtual machine that runs sort of on both, keeping track of updating the immediate state of the ledger and that global state of the data storage. Now, the transactions, in terms of transactions per second, are always going to be free. Everything that's happening over here on the DAPOS chain. And we're working on making the storage over here in the farming stake-based. So a similar system to how the transactions are free. If you want to host 500 megabytes worth of data, if you want to host a movie file and you want people to be able to download it, you sort of lock up some of your tokens in order for that file to stay hosted indefinitely. And in that way, we can provide what's free, so transaction costs in terms of the bandwidth, the storage, and the compute, which is pretty fun. Does that make sense?
Thanks for clarifying that, okay, that system. Okay, now let's move on into trade-offs, right? So there's always a trade-off when we talk about blockchain, and that's always a problem, scalability, right? You either have to choose between scalability, decentralization, and security. You can't have a perfect blockchain with all three aspects, right? So there must be something given up. So in the case of Dispatch Labs, what are the aspects that you gave up, or what's the fine balance that you guys have to keep in mind?
Yeah, I love that pick 2 of 3 triangle that people always use in the space. It's like scalability, decentralization, or security.
Right.
But if you don't pick security, like, kind of dummy are you, you know? Like, it's really like
coming from a security background.
like who really cuts that one out? It was like, yeah, no, we don't need any security in our system. I think of it much more as like just pick one or the other. There is an inherent trade-off between decentralization and scalability.
Yes.
And we are building our system for real-world businesses, real-world use cases that need levels of scalability that they don't have in current systems. And so our sort of quasi-compromise is the delegation of nodes. So we, instead of having, I usually draw this out when I explain it.
He does. He's a good drawer.
In Ethereum, any miner in the world can discover a block. So you need to be ready to listen to everywhere in the world all at once.
Right.
When we know that there's only 21 or 15 or 30 delegates, however many there are, then we know exactly who they are that we're listening to. And they know who to communicate with. So by sort of sacrificing a little bit of that decentralization, we get so much more scalability out of the system. But we're comfortable with that quasi-compromise because really the people who get to choose which delegates those are that are creating the truth are the stakeholders. The power is still really in the hands of the people.
Right. You can almost make it make an analogy to a republic versus democracy. Like full decentralization is a democracy.
Chaotic.
Right? It can be really chaotic, and mob rule can run. In a republic, you have delegates who choose the leaders, or in this case, you have everyone who's choosing the delegated witnesses. So that makes it a lot more central at that top layer, but underneath it's more decentralized. And I also think that that triangle is so very narrow-minded. I think that that triangle can grow, right? Like within the scalability arm, you got 7 transactions per second. By the way, TPS I think is a crap metric. I think she agrees. Yeah. But you've got 7 transactions per second, all the way up to tens of thousands right now in live protocols, right?
Yes.
And so I think we could probably push that in hundreds of thousands. And I think hundreds of thousands transactions per second is pretty good. I think that might be scalable enough, right? And so it's same thing with decentralization. We could probably push it to 100 nodes. And is that decentralized enough? I don't know. Like these are all kind of made up numbers at this point in the game. And I think there are purists, which are incredibly wonderful and useful to have in this industry because they push the thinking on what's possible and what's important. But I don't think we should be beholden to some pure ideal at the cost of being pragmatic for real world people doing real world stuff that has real world impact. That just seems to me to be not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks for that healthy discussion. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as your main competitors, and how do you have an edge over them?
It depends who we're talking to. When we're talking to some enterprise customers, our competition is AWS.
Right, and managed storage providers and managed service providers worldwide. In the enterprise, we're also competing with time, and we're competing with inertia, and we're competing with budget cycles, and all things that Patrick Winstrom knows really well, and I know pretty well. In kind of the small to medium enterprise market, which is kind of my bread and butter, my historical and career bread and butter, we're talking about noise, signal versus noise. Like there's a lot of people coming at them. They're going to choose one. How do you get their attention? And we're talking about 1,000-person startup in San Jose. We're talking about the 100-person startup that just got $30 million that wants to add blockchain as a component to their platform. They've got some friends, got a blockchain project. How do we get in the door there, right? Those are the people that have a little bit more room to be creative in what their technology stack looks like. And so they can choose blockchain. And they're all thinking about it because everybody's talking about it. But how to get their attention. And then in the blockchain space,
I like to think about it as this triple Venn diagram of sort of the functionality that we're built around. In one circle, we've got developer mindshare. And right now that is 100% owned by Ethereum. Almost every single smart contract, every single dApp is built on Ethereum, hands down, full stop. Then there's the scalability camp, like EOS and like Hashgraph, like so many others that are going to maximize those transactions per second. Still, some of them have some smart contract functionality, but a lot of times they're trying to do their own thing instead of trying to be more symbiotic with the existing Ethereum community. Then there's the distributed storage pool, which is like Filecoin, SIA, storage. And there's some overlap in between them. Like there's some smart contract, there's some scalability systems that include storage, and Ethereum is working on some scalability solutions, but really Dispatch is the one sitting there right in the middle, focusing on all three.
Okay, that's nice. Okay, just to confirm, when we talk about token utility, right? So will you guys be issuing your own native tokens to operate the Dispatch virtual machine, right? It's going to be a similar utility to the Ethereum token, right? The Ether, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have our own native token.
The Divi.
Okay, so the functionality will be similar, right? Because you guys are running your own virtual machine.
Yeah,
Is
so
there
instead of gas
difference?
being burnt, sorry, you finish your question?
Yeah, sorry. So is there going to be any salient differences between the functionalities and the utility of like Ethereum against your native tokens?
So the big two things that I think they're going to be, one is circling back to our original use case. We first wanted to build like a distributed iTunes. We wanted to create a peer-to-peer marketplace where fans could buy directly from artists. They would pay less, artists would earn more. It's win-win across the board. An obvious use for decentralization that still isn't thriving in the market. And we figured this out firsthand because the tech isn't ready. So not only do we offer virtual machine computation like Ethereum does, but we also offer that storage that's baked into the utility of the token. And no longer being gas that's consumed, but instead being bandwidth that's utilized, which is a network. We don't think about our home ISP being like burning through how much we have. Right? We think about it as we have got this much download speed, and if I'm streaming Netflix in this room and your brother's streaming Netflix in that room, somebody's downloading a video game over there, eventually you gotta divvy that up. So I think it's much more analogous to how networks actually work.
Yeah, and to be totally clear, it will be the similar functionality to Ethereum or many other smart contract-based blockchain systems, but it will have additional functionality that calls out for storage and managing data. We're just more data focused than most other blockchains. Data focused in a way that's not just flat storage like a storage or Filecoin or something like that.
Yeah, so I like to think about the marketing around Dispatch being an enterprise-ready blockchain. Less about enterprises being ready for blockchain, as we talked about, and more about the data sets, the functionality that we're focusing in on. When we talk about consumer applications, very few of them actually use lots of data. There's content like iTunes, like Netflix, and there's social media, and that's about it. After that, if you start looking at big data sets, it really transitions very quickly into the world of enterprise.
Yep.
Start looking at IoT, start looking at AI, start looking at business logic, medical records, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really where we're going to hit our biggest stride.
Yeah.
In terms of
He just talked about 5 of our great use cases right there, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so you mentioned that there are already like 10 to 15 independent, as in entities or businesses that are trying to build on the Dispatch solution, right? Can you reveal to us who they are, or at least in what line of business that they're in?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about a couple. So there are 8 or 9 projects that are working with our sister company called The Bureau directly on building on Dispatch. There's probably another, to be honest, there's probably another 20 or 25 projects that are committed to using Dispatch that we're either friends with, that are in the industry, that we are that have come and said, oh, we're looking for that perfect fit of the Venn diagram. The ones that, I mean, we could talk about them all, but just to keep the time short, we've got a business like Bucket Technologies. You can look them up. They're a company out of Northwest Arkansas. They're a very interesting project. Their stated goal is to get rid of coinage, physical coins like quarters and dimes and nickels and things, out of circulation. They have a deal with several large retail organizations. They're based in Northwest Arkansas, so I'm sure you can figure out who. And they're launching first in Singapore, so they've got to deal with some Singapore retail operations to provide that service to them. So these companies don't like coinage, and they want coinage taken out of circulation because it's hard to manage and deal with it.
And it's heavy and expensive.
It's heavy and expensive. It's metal in a bag. going to the bank. It's ridiculous, right? And so Bucket will turn that into cryptocurrency. When you go up and you say bucket the change, you're getting cryptocurrency in return. Then there's NanoVision, which is a subsidiary of a company called Nano Global. They're a hardware manufacturer, and they produce nano-sized chips. That's a data marketplace for molecular data research. So it's more of a healthcare play. We've got a social network with 31 million active users for sports fans. That's Talk TV. They're building on Dispatch. I could go on and on and on. But essentially, we're looking for those kind of use cases that will drive our thinking about what functionality needs to be included in the protocol. So you've got like social networks, you've got data marketplace, you've got kind of a financial inclusion play, you've got a real estate play with a new one called HIP Technologies out of London. The other thing that we're trying to do here is make sure that we're looking at a global situation, not just Bay Area startups, which are easy for us. I'd rather get projects from every continent because I think that will give us more and better data to operate from.
Okay, thanks for that. That signifies a lot of diverse use cases in the business,
Yeah.
and that's very, very important. Firstly, because you guys already have established partnerships or businesses already waiting to develop. So I think that's a very, very good indicator of the traction of the project, right? And lastly, right, on my end, so just to get a rough gauge about the development, right? So how many full-time team members do you have working on the project right now?
Well, total at Dispatch,
It's about 29 or 30. I'd have to ask our chief of staff the exact count. Actually, 2 more people said yes today, so 31.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then full-time developers, we've
got about 12 full-time staff.
Okay.
And that's QA is a really big part of that. We got 3, actually, we might be up to 13.
I think you're up to 14.
14?
Yep.
Nice. So we've got a dedicated QA team that's hammering away at our test net, finding bugs before anyone else can, which I think is remarkable that so few people are actually doing that in the blockchain space.
Yes.
It feels like the obvious solution to so many of the critical bugs that we see everywhere. And the dev team that we have is absolutely amazing. Most of them have had years of experience working together already. They've built out CDNs, which is a distributed storage network in and of itself, incredibly relevant, as well as having built out the, our VP of engineering, Greg McGregor, actually invented the prepaid SIM card that is still in use across most of Europe today. So lots of background in cryptography as well. An incredibly senior team, and I feel super, super fortunate to be working with these guys, to work on, it's so exciting to be able to every day hop on a call with them and walk up to the cutting edge of this new technology. And he's heard me say this a million times, and do what we can to just push it a little bit farther out. It's so exciting.
What's interesting to me as a serial entrepreneur, longtime entrepreneur in the tech space in San Francisco, this is the first time that I'm actually not worried about the development piece. I own a company that had a lot of developers on staff. I have a very extensive network in Silicon Valley of developers, high-end, high-quality developers. I figured when we kicked this project off, I figured I'd be recruiting. This guy, this joker over here, came in, 21-year-old guy, and he recruited an entire team of developers that had worked together for 10 years doing exactly relevant work in 2 weeks. And then they were all started. And I was like, where did you get these guys? Where did they come from? So it's funny, and to be totally transparent, I think we're a few weeks behind on a project, but as anyone who's ever run a development project before, a few weeks behind in 6 months is golden. It's an incredibly well-versed team, and they're incredibly smart. They're also incredibly engaged, not just on the development piece, but just on the thinking in blockchain and the industry, which I find incredibly gratifying. So it's nice to not have to worry so much about his side of the equation.
Thank you.
Thanks for the insights to your team, and I think that you guys have a great team ahead. Okay, so in the next part of the AMA, I'm going to pass the baton to my partner, Christopher, who's going to touch on the legal aspects of ask a few questions on the legal aspects, right?
Already.
So first of all,
Yeah, you'll go to sleep and I'll keep talking.
Great, guys. I guess now that this has covered the exciting, stimulating things, we'll switch more to a bit of the nerd legal side, just to tick a few boxes. I was wondering with the ICO industry and cryptocurrency being so new, there is sort of a real push for greater transparency with projects, and I just sort of wondered what you guys were putting in place to ensure that your investors and the community have that sort of transparency.
So I could go on. I could probably use the rest of our time on one soliloquy on this, but I'll try to keep it short. So first of all, it's bizarre that we have to think about this, right? So I'm a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. You form a company, you get investors, you have legal regulations that you follow. There's transparency involved there. So none of the things that are seemingly causing consternation in the crypto world seem that weird to me. Like financial disclosures, okay, I've been doing that for 25 years. Getting a legal team in place to make sure that you're following securities regulations, okay, I've been involved in lots of angel investing and in traditional equity investing in companies through funds for 25 years. So none of this is weird. None of the jargon is weird. I didn't come into the space thinking that legal or regulatory stuff is going to be all that hard or all that much of a concern. Now, I'm not naive. I think that the industry as a whole really just doesn't want to follow securities regulations, and I understand why. Because and I really do think that our token has real utility value, and to speak the jargon of the industry, is a utility token. But that jargon doesn't mean jack. There's no legal definition surrounding a security token or a utility token. There's just this new thing called a token or a coin or whatever you want to call it that the US government in the 3 or 4 different regulatory bodies that are there haven't really said what they think about it, other than the IRS says it's an asset that should be treated like property. That's official. So instead of kind of figuring out things ourselves or listening to 17 different law firms who told us 17 different things, what we did was we went and pinched a lawyer from the SEC. We hired a guy named Zachary Fallon. He helped write Reg A Plus for the SEC.
Amazingly sweet guy.
Yeah, also an incredibly nice human. And we hired him. And he obviously is good friends with a lot of people at the SEC. He is a diligent believer in following due process and being above board, which is good for us. He really does believe in the token economy in the crypto space, and that tokens are a fundamentally different new thing that haven't really been defined legally yet in the United States. We're strictly speaking talking about the United States right now because Dispatch Labs is domiciled here in California, and we're pretty dedicated to remaining an American company and having a public token sale in the US to non-accredited investors, which sounds very last summer of us, but I think it's important. So Zachary Fallon's been invaluable in shepherding us in our regulatory thinking. There are obviously everybody in the business has raised money on the SAFT. There's been some attempts at upgrading that SAFT, the SAFE-D, the SAFE-T, all sorts of different stuff. We've raised money on a SAFT. We started raising money back in January. We raised about $10 million in a very short amount of time. And we then paused. This is another thing that we're iconoclastic about. We paused while we hired a team. We built product. We decided to see if we could make sure that we could do the thing that we wanted to do before we took more people's money to do more. And then we investigated every possible scenario for regulatory compliance. What we've come down to is, we're still flexible. The American regulatory bodies haven't said definitively this is what's going to happen, so there's nothing specific to follow in the US. But what's clear is we're not a scam. We have real product. Testnet 2.0 is out. You can go use it today and develop on it today.
Go deploy some smart contracts.
Yeah, exactly. There are a multitude of regulatory systems and frameworks to follow if we want to consider going the regulatory route that defines us as a security. And what the latest, greatest public information from the SEC is that, what's a security today might not be a security tomorrow, depending on the decentralization of the network and a host of other factors. We heard that back in February from Zach Fallon. And so we've been building towards that. Truly believe, I think we all truly believe that our token, the Divi, is a utility token. It is a meter of bandwidth on our network, and we'll probably have other functionality included in it as well that makes it a real utility token. Is it going to be a utility token right now when we're seeking investors? I doubt it. I think they're probably looking for speculatory value on it. So that defines it as a security. So let's follow securities law. So we're investigating Reg A+. We're also investigating several other Jobs Act regulations for certain organizations that want to help us run some small portion of fundraising or airdrops or this or that, the other. And I think the meta message here is I'm just not afraid of the regulation. We just follow the best regulation, best practice to date, and we run our token sale that way. And in very short order, we want, not just for regulatory reasons, but for kind of philosophical reasons and network reasons, to get our protocol as decentralized as possible. And that will help us push towards that utility token. That was a lot, so I'll pause there.
Sure. No, I think thanks. It is useful information to understand your approach and who you've engaged to help you with it. I think a lot of the issue isn't so much. I think people that are new to the industry, they just sort of disregard a lot of the normal sort of legal and financial compliance framework that you should have in place, even if you're just running a small company. And it sounds like you guys haven't gone down that path. Yeah. You've actually, with your background, which you explained previously, you're familiar with the sort of the compliance regimes of larger companies and stuff like that. So yeah, so continuing with that theme, I think one of the things I think that's often overlooked with projects is the jurisdiction of the company that's actually behind the project. So are you able to just briefly explain sort of, where your company's incorporated and who the shareholders are?
Sure. So it's Dispatch Labs is an LLC here in California, registered here in California. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bureau, which is a public benefits corporation. A lot of people out there might not know what a public benefits corporation is. There was a movement started about 10 years ago that I was part of that kind of wanted to get away from a shareholder maximization value framework for thinking about public companies. And so, you hear about C Corps, you hear about LLCs, you hear about S Corps, you hear about limited partnerships, et cetera. Those are all kind of regulatorily recognized frameworks for building a company in the United States. And very common to have a C Corp with shareholders. The Public Benefits Corporation is treated like that in terms of the kind of operative parts, but the Public Benefits Corporation also has a fiduciary, it forces the shareholders to have a fiduciary responsibility towards a stated public good. And so I always say that the framework allows me to do business the way that I've always wanted to do business anyway, which is not to maximize profit for the shareholders, but to maximize value for a wide array of people who are involved, all stakeholders. That's employees, that's clients, that's vendors, that's partners, that's the girl that cleans the place, that's the guy that's, the new intern, as much as the person that gave us money. So we're operating under that regulatory auspice. The shareholders are essentially the leadership team in the company. So that's Zane and I, Patrick Windstrom, a woman named Diane Kressel, who's our chief of staff, and our chief ecosystem officer, whose name is Ivan Goldson. Also a kind of a thought leader in the ethics and kind of governance space, a guy named Raman Frey, who has been a friend of mine for years. He's also a shareholder. And we have a couple other minority shareholders. So it's spread out between about 10 people in total. The majority of it is in the direct leadership team. We're also the board of directors right now. And I actually think that's a weakness that we've got. I'd like some outside directors. We're not holding them necessarily holding spots for investors. I would prefer thought leaders in, a thought leader in governance, a thought leader in technology. A thought leader, that you go through the spectrum of things that we're attacking here. That's community, that's governance, that's technology. I'd rather a thought leader in a space that doesn't have a vested interest in the financials of the company, because ultimately the protocol is going to be ownerless. It's going to be decentralized out there in the world, and we're not going to have a stake in, or we're not going to have as much control in making it successful or not successful.
Understood. And just to clarify, you were saying that basically the project company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the bureau company that you just explained, and then you guys are shareholders of that parent company.
Correct.
Exactly.
Right. And just, I guess, some sort of financial questions. Who's your main bank? Who do you bank with for the project?
UBS. So big
UBS. Great. So I'm just looking at my questions here. And I guess one, and probably a very novice question for you guys, for me to you guys, but just sort of, what's your approach to storing cryptocurrency you receive as investment? Whether people are giving you Ethereum and Bitcoin, I mean, you guys just use a simple cold wallet. How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, it's a combination of different things, cold storage being included, but I'm not going to get into, for security reasons, I won't get into the exact numbers, but cold storage is a big one.
Great. And we've seen in the industry a few projects get into trouble with receiving cryptocurrency as a investment, but then then it tanks, and they sort of took the risk not to convert it to fiat in a prompt fashion. I mean, do you guys sort of have a process for that in terms of if you receive crypto, do you convert it weekly, or do you guys half in fiat, half in crypto?
There's two answers to that. First of all, we've gotten some money in fiat, which we seek investment dollars and ETH and BTC. We've gotten a host of other investments in other cryptocurrencies too. Our policy is to have about 6 months of burn in fiat. Because the market tanked, we're running a lighter than that right now. But we're fully funded through the end of the project, or releasing the protocol. We made sure that back in January when we got our first pot of money, and just after blockchain week when we got our second pot of money. So financial management is also another thing that I think is probably lightly thought of in the crypto space. But we've got a 5-year budget and a controller, so we think about that stuff too.
Great. And you were touching on before about the different ways you were trying to deal with the changing legal framework. Are any countries excluded from investing in your project at the moment?
Nope, not currently.
Okay. And at this stage, have you guys made a determination as to whether you plan to have a public sale?
We definitively will have a public sale.
Yep.
Okay, great. And I guess it's a little bit unusual in the context of cryptocurrency projects, but and it doesn't sound like you guys would have a need for this, but was there any consideration about having someone underwrite the project in the way you might for a standard project?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I think that there are going to be more and more projects that are underwritten. I think that there are multiple projects that are now going towards platforms that will underwrite their project. And we're talking about traditional crowdfunding platforms like Indiegogo has a project to help with ICOs. You've got the Coinless Republic people. You've got TokenFest. You've got all these different underwriters now that are, or companies that do some sort of underwriting. I think it's interesting. I don't think hedging your risk in that way is a bad idea. I think it's you don't have to do it all or none. And I think that we could potentially have some portion of the sale underwritten, or at least some portion of the public piece of token release be underwritten by one of these organizations. For instance, I know there are companies that are coming up with ways to do kind of a SEC blessed airdrop. That would be underwritten. I would be interested in that. Those kind of things we're investigating deeply. Okay.
Well, yeah, I think you'd be one of the few companies in the space actually doing that investigation. So good work on that. You mentioned before you'd bring on a former employee of the SEC. I think it's always useful just to understand who the main advisors to a project are. Are you able to sort of just briefly tell us who your main law firm and your main accountancy firm are that is working with you on the project?
Sure. So Zachary Fallon is our main counsel. He's our counsel. And through the Bureau and through the 8 or 9 other projects that are in the Bureau, we've actually sat down with Perkins Coie and Cooley and Mofo and every top global law firm, and had the conversation about domicile, about regulation, about this, that, and the other. So we've gotten lots of input from all of those big mainline, big brand, very expensive law firms. But the day-to-day work on our project is Zachary Fallon, because he's intimately knowledgeable about the space. So he saves
makes sense.
Yeah, he saves a lot of time and money. And then, for tax and finance, we have Deloitte, who we use for our approach there. We've got a couple other, we've got Patrick, who's got a PwC background, so we've got some access to the big four consulting firms. We kind of do this approach. I think you can tell we do this approach where the big brand name firms that have like a lot of panache, but really don't know what they're talking about, to be frank, help us at the big scale, at the kind of high level stuff. But for the day-to-day work, we want somebody who's really crypto industry specific.
I think that's a really nice way to approach it, to sort of, I guess, like you say, for the non-tech stuff, to have really recognized brands. I mean, I think a lot of our audience who will be watching this will understand that, Deloitte, a big four accounting firm, highly reputable and respected.
Yep.
You've got the best guy you can from the SEC to come in and give you a hand. So that's impressive.
Yeah.
With a lot of the way we see things done in the crypto world, it can be a bit fast and loose on sort of know your customer and AML stuff for onboarding investors. I don't imagine you guys are sort of following that sort of route, but is that something like a sort of a task that you outsource to a third party to run KYC on investors and just sort of take care of the anti-money laundering compliance side for you?
Yeah, so we have a third-party tool that we bought licensing for back in January when we first started, and we're using that tool today. I imagine that for our public token sale, we'll use one of the major platforms that kind of does a soup to nuts approach on that stuff, and we'll probably rerun everybody through that platform too. We haven't had any issue with it so far because we're not just taking money over PayPal kind of thing. We have a host of legal documents, and we get to know our investors really well. We have a community room for our investors where we actually engage them on a regular basis. So we actually have a little bit more of a relationship with our investors than probably a lot of these projects that just are taking money from anybody. Because I'm not interested in capital. It seems like getting capital for your project is fairly simple and straightforward in this world, in this industry. Another thing that a traditional tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley is definitely not used to. But money's easy. The strategic value of that investor and their network is far more interesting to me. So that's why we just get to know our folks a little bit more.
Understood. And I always think it helps to have a conversation with an investor who's about to put in a large chunk of change before you actually take the money, right?
You would think.
What you mentioned before that you had someone in the role of financial controller. I think it's sort of, we're seeing a lot of projects where they sort of set out a budget for how they're going to use project funds and how that's going to be allocated. And I don't think a lot of projects actually have safeguards and framework to ensure those project funds are going to be spent in the way they've actually advertised to investors. Is that something where your financial controller is going to sort of oversee that process and make sure that the 10% you were going to dedicate to I guess development or whatever the area might be is actually allocated to that area?
Yeah, so great question. So Patrick Winstrom is our COO. He wrote a 5-year budget in December or in January, early January. And, on a very normal process for us, but probably a little bit weird for a lot of crypto companies, he built a 5-year budget. I think 5 years is probably too long. I think we just need a 3-year budget. But then we hired a woman named Erin Clossy, who is our controller. She's someone who was my controller at my last company for 10 years. So I know her really well. And she is fine, controller is somebody who makes sure that budgets to actuals are met, right? And every month we manage that. So our burn so far this year has, for several months it was under what we promised to spend, and frankly we were under investing, I think. And then it went over, I think in June for the first time, our burn, and we're just managing to that. And that, it's funny, like that's just the normal way to run a company. And we're doing that. Because frankly, it's clarity for me too. It's clarity for Zane. Who can you hire next month? You need to hire somebody, but you overspent this month. You can't hire them. Like there's just normal and natural kind of frameworks there to kind of manage and execute well and hold yourself accountable, which I think we're really keen on.
So that's good to hear. Just a couple of questions to finish up. I might be premature at this stage of your project's development, but has there sort of been any sort of development of a listing policy and consideration of what exchanges that you guys might contemplate going? I know some projects are understandably sensitive talking about this issue, so that's something that an issue that you just want to park for now. That's fine, but we just thought we'd ask because we're here.
The third rail for the SEC right there is exchange listings. We're not really thinking about it, to be honest. Right now, we're building a product. We're going to release it to the public. We think our token is a utility token. There's lots of different ways to go about it. If it's a Reg A+, they're going to consider it a security, so we'll list it on an ATS exchange, many of which are already out and several more of which are coming. Just not something that we're all that concerned about right now.
Okay, great. Well then, guys, I think that just wraps it up for the legal DD side. I mean, it is impressive that you guys actually have thought through the issues and put in a framework in place to run it like a proper company. We don't often see that in this space. And like it sounds weird, but just doing the basics is something a lot of people aren't doing. So and the advisors and the people you got involved is impressive. So good job on that and congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let's just hand to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for the legal aspects. And thank you for the Dispatch team for explaining to us about your project and its features and its merit. We're really, really excited to see the development of Dispatch Lab and how it will progress. And we're definitely confident that you guys are going to do well. So we hope on our end, on Master the Crypto's end, that good luck on your project. And we hope that our audiences and users will understand after looking through this EMA about Dispatch Labs and how it could potentially disrupt the high throughput blockchain space, right? So thank you very much for attending this EMA, and we hope that you have a successful development on your projects, all right?
Yeah, thank you, Aziz, Chris, man. It's been great talking to y'all.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, see you.
Take care.
Take care.